Usually when we talk about the world around us, there's this underlying expectation of reliable, predictable rules.
Right, like gravity.
Yeah, exactly. You drop an apple, it falls. You send a text, it arrives. You get on an airplane, and, well, it lands at its destination.
Most of the time.
Right, most of the time. We just navigate our days trusting this, I guess you'd call it an invisible scaffolding of reality.
We assume everything fundamentally makes sense, or at least, that someone out there has the answers.
But what happens when that scaffolding simply collapses? Today, we are opening the files on 7 times the reliable rules of reality they just stopped applying.
Yeah, and to be clear, these aren't ghost stories.
No campfire tales here. We're doing a deep dive straight to the terrifying edges of human understanding. Our mission today is to look at these unresolved cases from our source article and really examine what they tell us about the fragility of our systems, our bodies, and our often really tenuous grip on reality itself.
And, while it's human nature to consume these kinds of unsolved mysteries as entertainment.
Oh, for sure. We all love a good puzzle.
Right, looking for hidden clues from the couch. But we have to ground ourselves in the reality of what we're discussing. These aren't just thought experiments.
Yeah, they're not.
These cases involve real people, real tragedies, and real families who've been stuck in this relentless, agonizing limbo of unanswered questions.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Behind every bizarre vanishing act, there's a family trapped in a reality where, the final chapter was just ripped out of the book entirely.
Exactly.
So, okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with how vast and unforgiving the world remains, despite our endless attempts to, control it.
It's a big planet.
It really is. I mean, we live in an era where you can track a misplaced smartphone down to the exact couch cushion it fell under.
We have an entire constellation of satellites, global radar.
Right. And yet, on March 8th, 2014, Malaysian Airlines Flight 370, carrying 239 passengers, took off for China and essentially evaporated.
It's just staggering to think about.
Less than an hour into the flight, the plane's transponder was turned off. It veered wildly off course, and after being tracked over the Indian Ocean for nearly 8 hours, it vanished.
Poof.
Gone. The theories from our sources are wild, ranging from a meteor strike instantly obliterating the aircraft to pilot-induced suicide.
Which, that theory comes up because the captain had flown a highly suspicious similar route on his home flight simulator a month prior.
Yeah, that detail is wild. But in the 12 years since, despite the largest multinational search in human history, they found exactly 3 pieces of confirmed debris. Just 3.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, to understand why MH370 is so profoundly unsettling, we really have to look at the mechanics of modern tracking.
Okay, lay it on me.
So we rely on a system of secondary radar. That depends on the plane actively pinging its location, altitude, and identity back to air traffic control.
Right, it's a two-way street.
Exactly. When that transponder goes dark, we're left with primary radar, which just bounces a radio wave off a physical object. But the Indian Ocean is unfathomably massive.
It's basically a black hole for that stuff.
Yeah, it's an environment completely hostile to radio waves, deep-sea sonar, and satellite imaging. We've developed this false sense of omniscience because we can pull up a digital map on our phones.
Yeah, the blue dot illusion.
Right. But this incident forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Our technology is entirely dependent on cooperative conditions.
Wow. So when a piece of machinery representing the pinnacle of our engineering bypasses those systems, we remember how much of the Earth is still just utterly indifferent to us.
It totally shatters the illusion of control.
Yeah.
And that massive indifferent ocean has a long history of swallowing human endeavors whole, long before we ever had radar to fail us.
Oh, absolutely. The ocean erasing people while leaving the stage intact is a historical constant.
We see the exact same terrifying dynamic in 1872.
Ah, the Mary Celeste, the ultimate locked room mystery, but set on the open Atlantic.
Set the scene for us.
So the setup is straightforward. A British-American merchant ship leaves New York, headed for Genoa, Italy. On board is Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife, their 2-year-old child, and a crew of 7.
All standard stuff.
Completely normal. Everything in the captain's log is perfectly fine. But less than 2 months later, the ship is found drifting aimlessly at sea, completely abandoned.
And you'd instinctively think pirates.
Right. Or, I don't know, a violent mutiny.
You would, except for the terrifying forensic reality of the scene. When boarding parties investigated the Mary Celeste, they found a ship where the cargo was entirely untouched.
Not a single thing stolen.
Nothing. The crew's personal belongings were sitting exactly where they were left. There was a sewing machine, a piano.
They left the piano.
Yeah. The ship was fully provisioned with food and water for months. Absolutely no blood, no signs of a struggle, and the vessel itself was perfectly seaworthy.
So that completely rules out piracy. And I guess it rules out any mythical sea monster attack, too. So why do 10 perfectly rational people, including a captain with his toddler, throw themselves off a perfectly safe ship into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean?
Well, decades later, modern chemistry provided what I think is the most compelling mechanism for this tragedy. The Mary Celeste was transporting industrial alcohol.
Okay.
The theory proposes that rough seas may have caused some of the barrels to leak. In the confined, unventilated hold of the ship, that alcohol would have vaporized.
Oh, wow. Building up pressure.
Right, creating a massive buildup of noxious fumes. Those expanding fumes could have blown the main hatch cover off with a terrifying bang.
That would definitely freak you out in the middle of the ocean.
And the crew, smelling the overwhelming chemical odor and fearing an imminent catastrophic explosion, just panicked. They abandoned a perfectly safe vessel to sit in a small lifeboat tethered to the main ship.
Just waiting for an explosion that never came.
Exactly. A storm likely severed the tow line. The tragic irony here is profound. They fled what they perceived to be a deadly, invisible threat, only to throw themselves into the unforgiving reality of the open sea.
That is deeply haunting. Just a misunderstanding of chemistry cost them their lives.
Very likely, yes.
But honestly, while the ocean physically erasing people is terrifying just because of its sheer scale, I find something else even more disturbing.
What's that?
It's one thing to vanish into the deep sea. It's entirely another when a person vanishes on solid ground in the middle of a bustling city, and the very institutions designed to protect us refuse to acknowledge objective reality.
Oh, you're talking about the Walter Collins case.
Yes. It is a chilling study in exactly that. It shifts our focus from the dangers of the natural world to the destructive power of institutional blindness.
This one is just staggering to read about.
It really is. So in 1928 in Los Angeles, a single mother named Christine Collins reports her 9-year-old son, Walter, missing. The LAPD searches, and 5 months later, they miraculously bring a boy to her door, claiming they found Walter.
Happy ending, supposedly.
Supposedly, but Christine looks at this child and knows, with absolute biological certainty, that he is not her son.
Obviously, a mother knows.
Right. And here's where I have to push back on the sheer absurdity of the official response. How does an entire police department double down on a mother not recognizing her own child?
It's horrifying.
They literally accused her of being a bad mother, and when she wouldn't back down, they had her committed to a psychiatric ward. Like, how do you force a narrative that hard?
Well, to understand it, you have to look at the institutional mechanics of the LAPD in the late 1920s. They were an organization operating under intense public scrutiny.
Lots of corruption scandals, right?
Exactly, facing severe criticism over their effectiveness. The psychological pressure they applied to Christine Collins wasn't just a careless mistake. It was an aggressive, defensive public relations strategy.
They needed a win.
The system needed a high-profile win so desperately that it weaponized psychiatric institutions to silence a dissenting voice. The institution's desperate need to successfully close a case completely overrode objective physical reality.
It is the ultimate state-sponsored gaslighting, and the fallout was devastating. The real Walter Collins was never found.
Never.
Law enforcement eventually suspected a known child murderer named Gordon Stewart Northcott, who was executed in 1930, but the physical evidence regarding Walter remained entirely inconclusive. We still don't know what happened to him.
It's a complete void.
The source notes this case was so wild that Clint Eastwood actually directed that 2008 movie Changeling about it.
Oh, right. And it serves as a crucial reminder for you, the listener, to always critically examine authority. Human pride within powerful institutions can be just as destructive, if not more so, than the original crime.
The cover-up is worse than the crime, as they say.
The LAPD's actions were a protective mechanism for the institution itself, violently executed at the expense of a grieving mother.
It's enraging because that was a conscious human choice. But, you know, our sources also highlight threats that aren't human at all.
Invisible natural forces.
Yeah, forces that attack the human body and mind, bypassing our defenses entirely.
Which is exactly what happened between 1917 and 1928 with the outbreak of encephalitis lethargica.
The sleeping sickness.
Yes, an illness that presents a profound neurological nightmare.
It infected over 500,000 people, spreading from Europe all the way to India and North America. And the specific details from the medical texts are just pure horror.
They really are.
Victims were literally frozen in time. They became living statues, completely unable to move their bodies, yet completely aware of their surroundings.
To understand how terrifying this is, think of the human nervous system, like the electrical wiring in a house.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
With encephalitis lethargica, it's suspected that severe brain inflammation acted like a melted switch. The electricity, the person's consciousness, their awareness, their ability to hear and see the room was still fully active.
So the power's on.
The power is flowing from the grid. But the physical switch required to turn on the lights, to move a muscle or speak a word, was completely destroyed.
Oh my God.
They were perfectly conscious, yet trapped inside a paralyzed shell.
And the scale was massive. I mean, a third of the victims died. Many who survived were locked in that paralyzed state for years.
Awful.
But what really gets me is that this wasn't just some isolated historical plague. It reemerged in Europe in the 1950s.
It did.
And then our source article points out it appeared in China in 2010, hospitalizing a child for 5 weeks with those exact same symptoms.
That is the medical mystery right there.
Mm-hmm.
Researchers have studied patients with similar symptoms, but the root cause, the specific environmental or biological trigger that causes this massive brain inflammation, it remains entirely unknown.
So the trigger is still out there just waiting.
Yeah.
That's terrifying. But, if encephalitis lethargica paralyzes you from the inside, forcing you into total stillness, the Dyatlov Pass mystery is its exact opposite.
Oh, absolutely.
We're looking at an unseen force that seemingly drives people to frantic, irrational, and totally self-destructive action.
The Dyatlov Pass incident in 1959 is one of the most thoroughly debated mysteries, precisely because the physical evidence left behind is so chaotic.
And deeply contradictory.
Right. I'll lay out the forensics because they actively resist a single cohesive narrative.
Okay, lay it out. So we have an expedition of 9 experienced hikers in the freezing Russian mountains. They pitch their tent, settle in for the night.
And weeks later, a search party finds a scene of absolute madness.
The tent is ripped open, but the crucial detail is that it was cut from the inside, right?
Yes. The hikers fled into sub-zero temperatures. The footprints in the snow show they were running away barefoot or in just socks.
In the freezing snow.
And when the bodies were recovered, the causes of death varied wildly. Some died of hypothermia, but they were found wearing almost no clothing.
Which makes no sense.
Others suffered severe blunt force trauma, comparable to a high-speed car crash, yet had no external tissue damage. One victim was missing a tongue. And to compound the confusion, several articles of their clothing showed significant levels of radioactivity.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because when you have a puzzle with pieces that just do not fit, people invent wild theories to force them together.
Aliens, a Yeti attack, secret military weapons.
Exactly. But our source material highlights a much more grounded biological theory proposed by a documentary filmmaker involving something called infrasound.
Like a brilliant hypothesis because it relies on physics and human biology rather than the supernatural.
Okay, break it down for us.
Well, before we touch on the sound, we have to explain the clothing. The reason freezing people strip off their clothes is a documented biological phenomenon called paradoxical undressing.
Paradoxical undressing, okay.
As hypothermia reaches its final fatal stages, the blood vessels that were constricted to save heat suddenly dilate. A massive rush of warm blood hits the skin, causing the nerve endings to misfire.
Oh, wow.
The freezing person suddenly feels like they're burning alive, so they tear their clothes off in the snow.
Okay, that makes horrifying sense. That explains the bodies. But what forces them to slash their way out of a safe tent in the first place? Could a sound frequency really override the survival instincts of experienced mountaineers?
Absolutely. The theory suggests the specific dome-like topography of the mountain interacted with high winds to create a Kármán vortex street.
A what?
A Kármán vortex street. It essentially acts like a giant whistle producing infrasound.
Okay.
These are sound waves at a frequency lower than the human ear can consciously hear, but human biology still reacts to them. Infrasound can physically resonate with your internal organs and your inner ear.
That sounds incredibly disorienting.
It triggers a profound physiological sense of impending doom, intense nausea, and overwhelming panic.
Wow.
When you couple a sudden, intense biological short circuit with pitch darkness and freezing temperatures, rational thought breaks down completely. The environment literally hacked their nervous systems, compelling them to destroy their only shelter to escape an invisible terror.
The Dyatlov hikers were destroyed by an environment they couldn't understand.
Exactly.
But sometimes humanity is mocked by things we really should be able to understand. Things that are perfectly preserved, sitting right in front of us, yet remain entirely unreadable.
Like a code we can't crack.
Yes. That brings us to a 600-year-old intellectual brick wall, the Voynich manuscript.
This represents a massive pivot from chaotic physical evidence to an entirely different kind of mystery. This is an intellectual cipher that refuses to break.
Imagine walking into a vault and finding a 250-page manuscript. It's filled with elaborate botanical illustrations of plants that do not exist and astronomical charts that don't map to our sky.
It sounds like a fantasy novel.
Right. It has absolutely no known author. It was discovered by an alchemist named Georg Burrish in the 1600s and later acquired by a Polish book dealer named Wilfred Voynich in 1912.
Which is where it gets its name.
Yep. Carbon dating confirms the parchment is from the early 1400s. But the most baffling part, the text is written in a completely unknown, unstudied language. It looks like a medical text, but we have zero idea what it actually says.
What's fascinating here is the sheer resilience of the text against modern technology. Why can't we read it?
Yeah, why can't AI just figure it out?
Because cryptography, whether done by human code breakers cracking the Enigma machine or modern artificial intelligence parsing massive data sets, relies on recognizable mechanisms.
Patterns.
Exactly. AI looks for a linguistic entropy, recurring structural patterns, or it requires a Rosetta Stone to anchor the translation.
And Voynich has none of that.
The Voynich text lacks the expected structural rules of known languages, yet it possesses too much internal consistency to be a simple, random, gibberish hoax.
So someone spent a lot of time writing it with rules that only they knew.
Yes. It fundamentally mocks our modern assumption that if humanity throws enough time and supercomputing power at a problem, we will eventually solve it.
It's a physical book we just can't read. And, if the Voynich manuscript is a physical book we can't translate, the final case from our sources makes me wonder if human memory itself can act like an untranslatable manuscript.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it.
Like something locked away, but somehow bleeding over into an entirely new life.
You're talking about the case of the Pollock sisters.
I am.
It pushes us past physical codes and into the absolute frontier of human consciousness and genetic memory.
The tragedy at the center of this is just heartbreaking. In 1957, two sisters, 11-year-old Joanna and 6-year-old Jacqueline, were killed in a horrific car accident.
Just devastating for the family.
Unimaginable. 1 year later, their grieving mother gives birth to twin girls, Gillian and Jennifer. Everything seems normal until the twins start walking and talking.
This is where it gets strange.
To the absolute bewilderment of the parents, these twins start asking for very specific toys that belonged to their deceased sister's toys they had never seen and didn't know existed.
Right.
They accurately recognized a school that Joanna and Jacqueline attended, despite the twins having absolutely no prior exposure to it. And eerily, they exhibited a severe abnormal phobia of passing cars.
The extremely specific nature of their forensic knowledge is what drew the attention of psychiatrist Ian Stevenson, who investigated the family for his extensive research into reincarnation.
Because it really does look like a reincarnation on paper.
It does. He documented their behaviors, but he noted a fascinating caveat. As Gillian and Jennifer grew older, passing the age of 7, these incredibly specific memories and fears simply vanished.
Just gone.
The manuscript closed, so to speak, and they went on to live completely normal lives.
But how does that even happen? How do memories transplant themselves?
This raises an important question, and it requires us to look at the emerging science of how trauma impacts biology.
Okay, tell me more.
Think of human DNA like a grand piano keyboard. The keys themselves, the genetic sequence, don't change. But the science of epigenetics shows us that intense trauma can act like a piece of sheet music, telling the body which keys to play and which keys to skip.
It alters how genes are expressed.
Exactly. Is it possible that intense emotional resonance or even fragments of memory itself can be passed down genetically in ways we haven't yet mapped? Or does human consciousness operate entirely outside the strict biological boundaries we've assigned to it?
We just don't know.
We simply don't have the instruments to measure it yet.
So what does this all mean for us, the listener at home? We've looked at a vanished commercial plane, an intact ghost ship, an institution that erased a child's identity,
A paralyzing biological switch.
a mountain that hacked the human brain, an unreadable 15th century book, and memories that seemingly survived death. To me, distilling all these sources down, they serve as a massive, humbling reminder that we really do not have it all figured out.
They absolutely do. And I think that is the core value of examining these materials.
Yeah.
Critical thinking is essential. We must investigate the forensics. We must understand the radar, the chemistry, the biology. But intellectual humility is equally vital.
That's a great phrase, intellectual humility.
Acknowledging the vast landscape of what we don't know is just as valuable as accumulating facts. It keeps us grounded, and it prevents exactly the kind of dangerous institutional arrogance we saw in the Walter Collins case.
That is such an important takeaway. We started this deep dive by talking about the reliable rules of reality. And we tend to view these unsolved mysteries as bizarre anomalies, right?
Right.
We treat them as little glitches in an otherwise perfectly functioning machine. But I want to leave you with this final thought to mull over today.
What is it?
What if they aren't the anomalies? What if the real mystery isn't that these inexplicable things happened, but that they don't happen every single day?
Wow.
We walk around assuming our daily reality is this tightly woven, indestructible fabric. But these 7 cases are the loose threads. If you pulled just one of them, what else about your daily reality would unravel?
That's a profound thought to end on.
Thank you so much for joining us and exploring the edges of the unknown today. Keep asking those big questions, stay curious, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.